We've heard of so many different White Star Line ships that it seems hard to keep all the names straight. For many, it seems like an infinite list of ships with several we've never heard of, in addition to the countless we already know about. To give proper definition to the White Star Fleet, we've made this video of a straight through and complete chronology of the White Star Liners, at least as complete as we can manage. While the White Star Line was founded in 1845 and owned ships prior to 1870, when Thomas Ismay rebooted the company, records are scant, and the list is too long to explain every ship prior to 1870. As seen on ShawCivilShips.org, White Star Line owned or chartered literally hundreds of vessels in this 25-year period. Maybe we'll tackle it in the future, probably not. For simplicity, we will only address ships owned or chartered by the White Star Line after the Ismay reboot and before the Cunard White Star merger in the 1930s. Over the span of 64 years, we'll see 89 ships, many with recurring names and name changes. There is a Wikipedia article that lists these ships and seems to be very reliable. Given the ease of access for our audience and the popularity of this page, this will be the basis for the video. The chronology represented in this video is based on the years they served the White Star Line, and not necessarily the year the ship was built. For example, the SS Vaterland was built in 1900, but we present it in this list in 1914, which is when the White Star Line acquired her. This video history is also meant to be a companion documentary to the other video on our YouTube channel detailing the history of the White Star Line as a company. The Oceanic. Built in 1870 by Harland and Wolff, she was the first deliberate instance of a White Star Liner being named with the traditional IC at the end. Though a revolutionary ship and highly successful, she was outclassed by 1874 and she was chartered off to the Occidental and Oriental Steamship Company, with whom the White Star Line was developing an intimate relationship with. Oceanic collided with the city of Chester in 1888, sinking her, and the Oceanic was scrapped in 1896. The Atlantic. A near-exact copy of the Oceanic, Atlantic was built in 1871. She served less than 2 years with the White Star Line before crashing on the rocks of Halifax, Nova Scotia in 1873, with the loss of around 550 souls. This was the worst disaster for the North Atlantic until 1898, and the worst disaster for the White Star Line until the Titanic in 1912. The Baltic. Baltic was another near-identical copy of the Oceanic, being the third of the Oceanic Class. Completed in 1871, she won the Blue Ribbon for fastest eastbound crossing, which she held for 2 years. She rescued survivors from the Assyria in a storm, but was sold to the Holland America Line in 1889 and renamed the Veendam. The Baltic sank in a collision in 1898. The Republic. The Republic was the fourth of the Oceanic Class and built in 1871. In 1872, the Republic pioneered the first company route to Chile in South America, but with the second generation of White Star Liners in 1874, the Republic was put on standby for around 15 years, when it was finally sold to the Holland America Line, then eventually to an Italian company. After the 1908 Messina earthquake, the ship served as temporary housing for refugees and was scrapped in 1910. The Adriatic. This ship was the fifth of the Oceanic Class and completed in 1872. It was one of the first ships to have gas lights instead of oil lamps, but the method of implementation was fraught with errors. In 1874, she crashed into Cunard's Parthia, and in 1875, she crashed into a sailing ship called Columbus. In 1876, she sank the Harvest Queen, in fact, a ship that was once chartered by the early White Star Line, killing all on board, and finally in 1878, she rammed and sank the G.A. Pike. Adriatic was scrapped in 1899. The Celtic. The Celtic was the final ship of the Oceanic Class and completed in 1872. She was originally to be called the Arctic, but the name was changed after consideration was given to another shipwreck of that name. In 1887, she collided with the RMS Britannic, a later White Star Liner, which we haven't explored yet, and both limped into New York Harbor together. In 1893, she was sold to the Thingvalla Line and scrapped in 1898. The Asiatic. The Asiatic and her sister, the Tropic, both from 1871, were outliers in the beginning of the White Star Line fleet. They were not built by Harland and Wolff, and they were designed as cargo ships for the southern routes to South America and southern Asia. The Asiatic was sold off to the African Steamship Company to raise funds after the loss of the Atlantic in 1873. The Asiatic was the oldest of the White Star Line ships to survive into the 1900s. The Tropic. The Tropic was the sister of the Asiatic, with the same intentions and routes as her sister, and was also sold off after the wreck of the Atlantic. She was sold to a Spanish company and later scrapped in 1894. The Traffic. The Traffic was a tender built by Harland and Wolff in 1872, not to be confused with the later Traffic, the sister of the Nomadic, built in 1911 for service in Cherbourg. The first Traffic was meant for use in the Liverpool harbors. She was sold in 1896 and then converted to a barge after the First World War. She was sunk during a raid in the Second World War, then refloated, serving until 1955. With 82 years of service, the Traffic had perhaps the longest career of any White Star Line ship. Traffic was also the smallest White Star Liner ever, even smaller than the chartered clipper ships of the original White Star Line. The Belgic. The Belgic was a cargo ship built originally for the Bibby Line, but purchased during construction by the White Star Line for South American service, with her first voyage being in April 1873, only 2 weeks after the wreck of the Atlantic. In 1875, she was chartered out to the Occidental and Oriental Steamship Company along with her sister, the Gallic, and the Oceanic. She wrecked in 1884. The Gallic. The Gallic, built in 1873, served alongside her sister, the Belgic, and sold to the Occidental and Oriental in 1875. She was wrecked, salvaged, and scrapped, all in 1896. The Britannic. The first Britannic, built in 1874, was essentially an upscaled and upgraded version of the Oceanic Class. It captured the blue ribbon for both west and eastbound voyage. She was hugely successful, and is seen as almost as innovative as the Oceanic a few years prior. In 1887, she was involved in the crash with the Celtic, and limped into New York Harbor. In 1899, she served as a troop ship for the Royal Navy in the Boer War, and was scrapped in 1903. The Germanic. Completed alongside her sister, the Britannic, in 1874, Germanic would have a long and colorful career, capturing the blue ribbon twice and surviving both world wars. In 1899, she sank at her New York pier from heavy snow and ice, but was refloated. She was sold to the Ottoman Empire, serving as a troop ship, sank, and refloated. In 1950, she became a floating hotel similar to the Queen Mary in Long Beach, but this lasted less than a year. Her service of 75 years made her likely the longest-serving ocean liner, after Cunard's Parthia, and second longest functioning ship built for the White Star Line after the first Traffic. The Arabic. The Arabic was a combination cargo-passenger liner completed in 1881 and was the White Star Line's first steel-hulled ship. In 1882, she was chartered out to the Occidental and Oriental and then sold to the Holland America Line in 1890. She was scrapped in 1901. The Coptic. The Coptic was completed in 1881 and was also chartered out to the O&O. In 1897, cinematographer Frederick Blecknenden filmed the liner for Thomas Edison's company, making it perhaps one of the first ocean liners ever filmed. In 1911, it was sold off to the Oriental Steamship Company and then scrapped in 1926. The Doric. Sister of the Coptic, she was completed in 1883. She serviced New Zealand and was transferred to the O&O to serve between San Francisco and Hong Kong. In 1906, she was sold to the Pacific Mail Steamship Company, the leading competitor of the O&O, and renamed the Asia. In 1911, the Doric ran aground off China and was then looted and burned by locals. Jeez. The Ionic. Sister of the Doric, the Ionic was finished in 1883 and immediately chartered out to one of White Star Line's partners, the New Zealand Shipping Company. In 1900, she was chartered out by the Spanish government to bring home Spanish troops after the Spanish-American War. Later that year, she was sold to the Aberdeen Line and then scrapped in 1906. The Belgic II. In 1885, the second Belgic was built. The Belgic was one of the first ships to have electrical lighting and was immediately chartered out to the O&O Steamship Company. She suffered a collision with another liner, the Ulysses, and on another occasion ran aground, but she continued service until sold to the Atlantic Transport Line and then requisitioned for the Boer War, after which she was scrapped in 1903. The Gallic II. The Gallic, completed in 1885, was nearly identical to her sister the Belgic, and the two of them shared names with the White Star Line's two cargo ships from the previous decade. The Gallic was chartered to the O&O before being sold to the Pacific Steamship Company in 1905 and then scrapped in 1907. The Kufic. The Kufic, completed in 1888, served the White Star Line between Liverpool and New York for 8 years before being chartered to the Spanish Shipping Company during the Cuban Revolution in the 1890s. She served the White Star Line for another 3 years and then was sold to the Dominion Line in 1901. She wrecked in 1919, killing all 40 crew on board. The Runic. The Runic, completed in 1889 and sister of the Kufic, served a very long and colorful career. She was designed as a livestock carrier, and in 1895 sold and resold in 1899, and then once more in 1912 when she became a Norwegian whaling ship and renamed the Emo. She was chartered by the Belgian Relief Commission in 1917. En route to New York City to pick up American relief supplies, she stopped in Halifax to be inspected. In Halifax, she collided with a French ship, the Mont Blanc, which was carrying a large amount of ammunition for the war. The Mont Blanc ignited, and 17 minutes later exploded, obliterating the city of Halifax in the largest man-made explosion up to this date. The Emo was thrown ashore, but was later salvaged and repaired. In 1920, she was renamed the Gouvernerin, and in 1921, after her helmsman supposedly passed out drunk, the ship grounded in the Falkland Islands, where she still sits wrecked. The Teutonic. The Teutonic was built in 1889 and was the first White Star Liner without square-rigged sails. Teutonic and her sister, Majestic, were the first ships to gain the same prestige since the Britannic had 15 years earlier, so the Teutonic can be seen as the beginning of the third generation of White Star Liners. She participated in the 1889 Spithead Naval Review, where she was toured by Kaiser Wilhelm II, where she was the inspiration for Germany to build the Kaiser class a few years later. Teutonic captured the Blue Riband and later became Britain's first armored merchant cruiser. She was a highly successful liner, her voyages often completely sold out. Like many other White Star Liners, she was used as a transport during the Boer War. In 1901, she was hit by a rogue wave, which crashed over the ship and took the lookouts clean out of the nest. When the Olympic was launched, the Teutonic was no longer needed and was transferred to the Dominion Line. In World War I, she became a merchant cruiser once more, and in 1916 was armed with 6-inch guns to protect the convoys. She was finally scrapped in 1921. The Majestic. The Majestic, the younger sister of the Teutonic, was completed in 1889 as well, and also captured the Blue Riband. Captain E.J. Smith, later the captain of the Titanic, commanded the Majestic for 9 years, during which time Smith and the Majestic served together in the Boer War. Charles Lightoller, also of the Titanic, served on the Majestic under Captain Smith. Similar to the Olympic replacing the Teutonic, the Titanic replaced the Majestic in 1912, but this replacement was short-lived as the Titanic sank on her maiden voyage. In 1913, she rescued survivors from the sinking schooner Garonne and then was scrapped in 1914. The Nomadic. Not to be confused with the second Nomadic, a tender for the Olympic class in 1911, which still exists today. The first Nomadic was built in 1891 as a livestock carrier until serving as a troop ship in the Boer War, and then transferred to the Dominion Line in 1903. Then to the Leyland Line in 1921, being scrapped in 1926. The Tuareg. The Tuareg was the sister of the first Nomadic and completed in 1891, running the White Star Line service between Liverpool and Portland, Maine. In 1903, she was transferred to the Dominion Line along with her sister, the Nomadic, and then to the Leyland Line in 1921, serving 3 years longer than her older sister, and was scrapped in 1929. The Magnetic. The Magnetic, built in 1891, is often overlooked in the history of the White Star Line. She served as a tender in Liverpool and was the personal tender of the Teutonic during the Spithead Review, and in 1911 was photographed alongside the Olympic and the Titanic in Belfast. She was sold in 1932 and then scrapped in 1935 after having served as a tender, a tug, and a riverboat cruiser. The Naronic. The Naronic is considered one of the great mysteries of the White Star Line. Built in 1892, she was a livestock passenger combination, and in 1893 disappeared with all hands. 2 lifeboats were later found, as well as up to 4 notes in bottles, claiming that they were in a blinding snowstorm and had hit an iceberg. Some doubt the authenticity of the bottles. The wreck has never been found. The Bovic. The Bovic, sister of the Naronic, was also completed in 1892 as a livestock and passenger carrier, but later converted to being exclusively for passengers. In the First World War, still serving as a passenger ship, she was nearly sunk by the same U-boat that sank White Star Line's second Arabic, and was subsequently stalked by the U-boat before it escaped. In 1917 and 1918, she entered military service and was sold to the Leyland Line in 1922, only to be scrapped 6 years later in 1928. The Gothic. The Gothic was completed in 1893 and served between London and New Zealand, suffering a fire in 1906. She was transferred to the Red Star Line in 1911 and then back to the White Star Line in 1913, and then again back to the Red Star Line in 1915, and then once more back to the White Star Line in 1921. She crashed in 1924 and was scrapped in 1925. The Civic. The Civic was completed in 1894 and worked as a cargo ship, and in 1908 was transferred to the Australian service. She was one of the first British liners to test out the Suez Canal, but kept getting grounded. She was converted into a decoy for the battle cruiser HMS Queen Mary in the early part of the First World War, and then later became an oil ship. After the war, she continued work as an oil ship for a petroleum company until she was scrapped in 1933. The Pontic. In 1894, the White Star Line also welcomed the Pontic to their fleet. She was a tender in Liverpool, and in 1919 was sold off to a towing company. In 1925, she was sold and converted to a coal and sand carrier, and scrapped in 1930. The Georgic. In 1895, the White Star Line introduced the Georgic to replace the lost Naronic. The Georgic was also a cargo ship, and so far the largest White Star Line ship to date, as well as the largest cargo ship in the world at the time. The size made her a bit unwieldy, and she suffered no less than 6 collisions by the outbreak of the First World War. In 1916, she was intercepted by the German merchant raider Möwe, who stopped her, took aboard her entire crew, and then scuttled her, with all 1,200 horses still on board. The Delphic. Completed in mid-1897, the White Star Line sent her on 2 test voyages before she entered service in October, servicing between London and New Zealand. Shortly after, she became a troop ship for the Boer War and re-entered civilian service afterward. For most of the First World War, the ship continued passenger service, dodging torpedoes on at least one occasion, In 1917, the ship was requisitioned and shortly after was torpedoed and sunk by the UC-72 off Sicily, killing 5 people. The Cymric. The Cymric was completed in 1897 and was by far the largest White Star Liner to date, with 13,000 tons. She was also the first White Star Liner where emphasis was taken off of speed and placed onto passenger comfort. She was originally designed as a cargo ship, but the plan was changed during construction. The ship itself wasn't immensely successful, but the concept of comfort over speed was solid. The Cymric was transferred to the Liverpool to Boston route for 9 years. It served as a troop ship in both the Boer War and the First World War, and in 1916 was torpedoed 3 times by the same U-boat that sank the Lusitania. The ship sank the following day with 5 casualties. The Afric, built in 1898, was the first of the White Star Line's Jubilee Class of 5 steamers, designed for the Australian route, named the Jubilee Class in honor of the Diamond Jubilee of Queen Victoria. The Afric was designed with special emphasis on refrigerated cargo in order to provide Australia with shipments of meat. Its civilian career was relatively uneventful, but it served in both the Boer War and the First World War, finally being torpedoed and sunk off Cornwall. The Medic of 1899 was the second of the Jubilee class. Although spelled as medic, it's pronounced as medic for some reason. Almost immediately in its career, it participated in the Boer War by transporting troops. In 1907, it collided with a tanker but was later repaired. Once more, the Medic entered military service, but this time for the First World War, which she survived. In 1928, she was sold off and renamed the Hectoria and converted into a whaling ship. She was even used in Antarctic expeditions, where some geographical features in the region were named after her. She was requisitioned in the Second World War and torpedoed in 1942. It sank with only 1 death. The Persic, built in 1899, was the third of the Jubilee class. The Boer War was raging as the ship began her career, and right away was pressed into service transporting soldiers to the front and wounded back. On her first voyage, the ship's rudder broke, and it was stranded until a replacement arrived. She rescued survivors from the flaming Madura in the year 1900, and withstood a torpedo strike in the First World War. In 1927, she was scrapped in the Netherlands. The Oceanic II. The Oceanic, or the Second Oceanic, is the first legendary White Star Liner we've seen in a decade. Interrupting the Jubilee class, the Oceanic first sailed in 1899. She was the first ship in history to be larger than the Great Eastern in length. She was a wildly successful liner and well designed all around, though the crew could never comfortably run her at full speed due to vibrations. She suffered collisions, rough storms, mutinies, and nearly gave in to a fire on a ship moored next to her. But she pushed through all of them. In 1912, the Titanic sailed past her on its departure in Southampton. She even witnessed the New York incident firsthand. A month after the Titanic disaster, she found Titanic's infamous collapsible lifeboat A, containing 3 dead bodies. In 1914, while serving in the First World War and crewed by many of Titanic's surviving officers, including Titanic's second officer Charles Lightoller and Officer David Blair, Titanic's original third officer who was reassigned, she grounded on a reef and was lost without fatality, being the first Allied ship lost in the war. The Runic II. Back to the Jubilee class, the 4th ship built was launched in 1900. She had a relatively uneventful career, serving the First World War without major incident aside from a collision without fatality. In 1930, she was sold and converted to a whaling ship. She was sailing to Antarctica in 1940 as part of a convoy when she was torpedoed and sunk with 2 deaths. The Subic. The 5th and final installment of the Jubilee class is the Subic. The beginning of her career went by without comment, but in 1907 she became stuck on the rocks off Cornwall and was subject to a very unique salvage operation. Only her bow was stuck, and the rest of her body was undamaged. Salvors decided to close the watertight doors and cut the entire bow off. I should say, blow it off, as they used explosives to do so. She was towed to Southampton, and a replacement bow was towed in from Belfast. After a successful reconstruction, she continued her career through the First World War and was sold off in 1920. In the Second World War, she was stranded in neutral Sweden. Her crew, along with several other ships, made a daring attempt to escape Sweden and break through the Nazi-controlled waters, but the Germans caught up with them. Rather than let her be captured, her crew scuttled her. The Celtic II. The Celtic was made from the scraps of the planned sister ship to the Oceanic II, the Olympic. Built in 1901 and the largest ship in the world at the time, and the first ship larger than the Great Eastern in terms of tonnage, the Celtic is the first of a class of ships that will be known as the Big Four. During the war, she was first an armed merchant ship and then converted to a troop ship. She suffered both a mine strike and a torpedo attack, with fatalities and damage on both occasions, but the ship was repaired both times. In 1928, she was stuck off of the rocks of Cove, Ireland, formerly Queenstown. Her passengers and crew were saved, but a few men died in the salvage efforts. The ship was a total loss. The Athenic. Simultaneous to the construction of the Big Four, Harland and Wolff was hard at work building 3 sister ships for the New Zealand route of the White Star Line, the first of which was the RMS Athenic. These were the first ships ordered by the White Star Line after the acquisition by the American group, the International Mercantile Marine Company, or IMM. In the First World War, she was a troop ship, and afterwards sold as a whaling ship. In World War II, she was captured by the Germans and was finally scrapped in 1968. The Corinthic. The Corinthic was the second of the Athenic class of New Zealand liners and the first White Star liner launched in 1902. She served as a troop ship in the war, and in the 1920s rescued survivors from a wrecked schooner off of Newfoundland. She was scrapped in 1931. The Ionic II. The Ionic is the third and final ship of the Athenic class and launched in 1902. She was the first ship on the New Zealand route to be equipped with Marconi wireless. While serving as a troop ship in the war, she was almost destroyed by a torpedo, having narrowly dodged it by 15 yards. She was still in service when the White Star Line merged with the Cunard line, but was quickly sold off. She was scrapped in 1936. The Seadric. The Big Four were being built parallel to the Athenic class. The second was launched in 1902 and sailed in 1903. She stole the title of largest ship in the world from her older sister, the Celtic. In 1912, she was sitting in New York at the time of the Titanic disaster, and she was ordered to delay her departure until the Carpathia arrived with survivors in order to carry her crew back, though she never did since many of them were subpoenaed for court inquiries. In the war, she sank 2 ships in collisions, and after the war she crashed into Cunard Scythia in Cove. She was scrapped near Edinburgh in 1932. The Victorian. Here's a ship you never heard of. Built by Harland and Wolff for the Leyland Line, this cattle carrier was chartered by the White Star Line in 1903 and then went back to the Leyland Line service. She was renamed the SS Russian in 1914 to avoid confusion with Allen Line's SS Victorian. The Russian was lost in a torpedo attack in 1916. The Armenian. Just as with the Victorian, the Armenian was built in 1895 and chartered for cargo services for the White Star Line in 1903. She was lost in 1915 to a torpedo attack, just like her sister. The Arabic II. The Arabic was built in 1902 for the Atlantic Transport Line as the Minnewaska, but she was transferred to the White Star Line and renamed the Arabic. She served the transatlantic route until the First World War when she was sunk by U-24 after the submarine believed the Arabic was trying to ram her. The Arabic was a neutral ship carrying passengers and sparked outrage in the press, much like the Lusitania incident later in the war. The Romanic. The Romanic was originally built under the name SS New England in 1898 by Harland and Wolff for the Dominion Line alongside two other ships that would be folded into the White Star Line in 1903. She was sold to the Allen Line and named the Scandinavian. She served as a troop ship in the First World War and was scrapped in 1923. The Republic II. The Republic is a well-known White Star Liner among historians, but is somewhat forgotten by the public, although clickbait lists often rank her as one of the most famous shipwrecks in history. Built for the Dominion Line alongside the Cretic, Romanic, and the Canopic under the name Columbus, she operated seasonally on the Mediterranean route in the summer and Atlantic route in the winter. She earned the nickname the Millionaire Ship thanks to her luxurious and spacious first-class accommodations. In 1909, she was struck by the SS Florida off of Nantucket. 3 people were killed on each ship, and eventually the Republic would sink from the damage. Thanks to Marconi operator Jack Binns, the Republic was quickly able to call the RMS Baltic for help, and all lives were saved, aside from those lost in the initial collision. This incident bolstered the public's trust in the safety of shipping, a trust that would set them up for disaster in the Titanic sinking 3 years later. The Republic is rumored to have a massive wealth of gold in her wreck, and was the subject of the History Channel TV show Billion Dollar Wreck. The wreck is privately owned, but her hold is inaccessible to date. The Canopic. The Canopic was built as the Commonwealth by Harland and Wolff for the Dominion Line and transferred to the White Star Line in 1903. She served in the First World War and was scrapped in 1925. The Cretic. The Cretic was originally built as the Hanoverian for the Leyland Line and then moved to the Dominion Line. In 1903, she was transferred to the White Star Line and ran the Atlantic route until the First World War, and after serving as a troop ship, served in the Mediterranean routes. She switched back to the Leyland Line and was chartered by the Red Star Line before being broken up in 1929. The Kufic II. The Kufic was originally built in 1895 for the West India and Pacific Steamship Company under the name SS American. In 1904, she became a White Star Liner and her name was changed to Kufic. She served the Australian routes alongside her sister, the Tropic, and the White Star Line's Jubilee Class. She served in the war and was scrapped in 1932. The Tropic II. Like her sister, she was built as the SS European for the West India Pacific Steamship Company and transferred to the White Star Line in 1904, where she served the Australian routes. She crashed a few times and served in the war, being sold in 1923 to an Italian company and then scrapped in 1933. The Baltic II. A lot of ships were acquired during the construction of the Big Four, all as a result of IMM's purchase of the White Star Line. Baltic was the third of the Big Four and became the largest ship in the world. Built in 1903 and sailing in 1904, she was under the command of Titanic's future captain E.J. Smith. She rescued survivors from the wreck of the Republic in 1909 and received Titanic's distress calls in 1912. She tried to help but was too far away. During the war, she evacuated neutral Americans from war-torn Europe. In 1929, she rescued more survivors from a sinking schooner. It seems she spent most of her career being a total bro to the other ships on the Atlantic. She was scrapped in 1933. The Gallic, not the Gaelic, but the Gallic, was a paddle wheel steamer built in Birkenhead in 1894. She served as a tender for the White Star Line in Cherbourg, but was quickly rendered too small for the increasing number of White Star Line passengers. To replace her, White Star Line commissioned 2 tenders, the Nomadic and the Traffic, which we will get to shortly. She was scrapped in 1913. The Adriatic II. The final ship of the Big Four, the Adriatic, was built in 1906 and sailing in 1907. Unlike her older sisters, she was not large enough to claim the title of largest ship in the world, being launched the same day as Cunard's massive RMS Mauretania. Adriatic was a groundbreaking ship in luxury, however, being the first ship in the world with a swimming pool and a Turkish bath. She also was the first ship to use the Southampton docks after they were rebuilt in 1907. She ran the Atlantic route and carried some of Titanic's survivors back to England in 1912. In the war, she was a troop ship, and after an uneventful career, she was scrapped in 1935. Here's an odd man out in the White Star Line fleet, the sailing ship Mersey, Named after the River Mersey in Liverpool, this ship was built in 1894 and acquired by the White Star Line in 1908 as part of their training program, on which the company's officers and crew would master their ocean-going skills. Several of Titanic's officers gained experience aboard this sailing vessel, and in 1918 she became the first sailing ship to be equipped with a radio. The White Star Line sold her around 1915, and she was scrapped in 1923. The Laurentic. She was originally ordered by the Dominion Line but transferred to the White Star Line during construction, being their first ship to enter the company's Canadian passenger service. She began service in 1909 and suffered storm damage the same year. She was known for her speed. In 1910, Murder Hawley Crippen fled England on board the SS Montrose. The police raced the Montrose on board the Laurentic, beating the ship and waiting for the murderer on the other side of the sea. In the First World War, while carrying a special cargo, she struck a mine and sank with a loss of 354 people. The Megantic. Sister to the Laurentic, she was ordered by the Dominion Line and transferred to the White Star Line in construction. She entered service in 1909 and, like her sister, was also involved in the arrest of murderer Harley Crippen, bringing him back to Britain in custody. She dodged attacks in the First World War and was scrapped in 1933. The Zealandic. The Zealandic entered service in 1911 and served the New Zealand route and helped a bit during the First World War. She was purchased in the 1920s and in the Second World War was disguised as an aircraft carrier to act as a decoy. She became struck on rocks and was torpedoed as she was trying to be refloated. The Nomadic II. The Nomadic was built as a tender for the White Star Line's Olympic Class, which was now in construction. Launched in 1911, she not only served the Olympic and Titanic, but many other ships in Cherbourg, including the Queen Mary, the Normandy, Queen Elizabeth, and any other ship needing tender service. She assisted in the evacuation of Cherbourg and made her way back to France after the Second World War. In 1974, she was moved to the Seine River in Paris and acted as a restaurant at the foot of the Eiffel Tower. In 2006, being the only remaining White Star liner afloat, she was purchased by Northern Irish interests and moved back to Belfast, where she was restored as a museum ship, opening in 2012. She's still there, where visitors can explore her and walk in the footsteps of her countless passengers, including those who boarded the Titanic through her in 1912. The Traffic II. The Traffic was built alongside the Nomadic, with the intentions of serving as an Olympic-class tender in Cherbourg, primarily for third class and baggage. She served as a minesweeper in the First World War. During the Second World War, the French scuttled her in order to prevent the Germans from using her, but the Germans refloated her and armed her for defense. Her destruction is a gray area. Some say she was scrapped by the Germans, others say that she was sunk by the Allies. In any case, she did not survive the Second World War. The Olympic. We all know the RMS Olympic, but in 1911, she was the largest ship in the world by far. She was involved in several collisions, including a deliberate ramming of a U-boat in the First World War. She served many successful years and was scrapped in 1935. The Belgic III. The Belgic is wedged in between the Olympic and the Titanic in this chronology. The Belgic was a small ship built in Camden, New Jersey, and owned by the Red Star Line, and originally named the Samland. She served with the White Star Line only for a year or two before being sent back to the Red Star Line. She was scrapped in 1931. The Titanic. We all know the story of the Titanic as well. Finished in 1912, she sailed only one voyage and was lost after striking an iceberg with 1,496 casualties. Her story shocked the world and continues to do so to this day, and is more than likely the reason why you are watching our videos. The Ceramic. Ceramic was constructed for the White Star Line by Harland and Wolff and was completed in 1913. She was the largest ship to serve the Liverpool-Australia route until 1923. Ceramic was requisitioned during the First World War as a troop ship for the 1st Australian Imperial Force. during which time she narrowly survived a number of torpedo attacks. While sailing near the Canary Islands, she was chased by a surfaced U-boat for a full 40 minutes, which she outran while firing on her attacker. During service in the Second World War, she survived a collision with a cargo ship, but ultimately met a tragic fate. In December 1942, Ceramic was torpedoed 5 times by a German U-boat. She sank in the middle of a heavy storm, and of the 656 people on board, only 1 survived. The Vaterland. Launched in 1900 by the Red Star Line as a passenger ship, the SS Vaterland, like many of the aforementioned ships, was converted to a troop ship at the beginning of the First World War. The Vaterland is not to be confused with the Vaterland, later known as the SS Leviathan. During her military service, and now being operated by White Star Dominion Line, she was renamed the Southland, as the Dutch name Vaterland was thought to be too German-sounding. The Southland was torpedoed twice. The first incident killed 40 of her men, but she was repaired and returned to service. In June 1917, she was struck again off the coast of Ireland, and this time she sank with 4 lives lost. The Lapland. The next ship in our White Star Line chronology was another charter from the Red Star Line, the SS Lapland. She was launched in 1908 as a passenger ship. The most notable event in the life of the Lapland was when, in the aftermath of the sinking of the Titanic, she was hired by the White Star Line to return surviving Titanic crew members to England following their investigations in the United States. The Lapland was requisitioned as a troop ship during the war, and after the war, now sailing under the White Star Line flag, she returned to her role as a passenger ship. In 1920, she resumed service for the Red Star Line, and in 1933 was sold to Japanese owners who scrapped her a year later. The Britannic II. We all know about the RMS Britannic, though for most of her exploits, she was most often referred to as the HMHS Britannic. Launched in 1914, she was the 3rd of the Olympic class and completed as a hospital ship for use in the First World War. She participated in the evacuation of the Dardanelles and struck a mine in 1916 with the loss of around 30 men, having never once served a commercial voyage. She remains the largest passenger shipwreck on the sea floor. The Belgic IV. Another ship under construction at Harland and Wolff at the time that was commandeered for the war effort was the massive liner called the Civic. When the war came calling, she was hastily finished as a cargo ship instead of as a liner and renamed the Belgic. There's a pattern of White Star Line using the name Belgic for their cargo ships. We are now on the 4th and final Belgic. She served as a cargo and troop carrier and was converted back to an ocean liner in 1921, being handed over to the White Star Line's Dutch partner, the Red Star Line, and renamed the Belgenland. Albert Einstein sailed aboard her when he found out Hitler had become Chancellor of Germany, and Einstein vowed never to return home again. Titanic and Britannic survivor Violet Jessop also sailed 2 world cruises on her in the 1920s. The Belgenland was sold and scrapped in 1936. The Justitia. Sister of the Belgic, and originally to be named the Statendam, the Justitia was also pressed into service in the First World War before her construction was complete. She was first handed to the Cunard line, hence the suffix IA at the end, but because of crew shortages, the ship was transferred to the White Star Line. White Star Line easily stocked her with a crew, since they had just lost the Britannic, and assigned the displaced personnel from that. In 1918, the Justitia was sailing from Belfast to New York when she was torpedoed. The watertight doors were quickly closed, preventing a sinking. A second, third, and even a 4th torpedo were fired into the liner. Still putting up a fight, the limping ship tried to beach herself with the help of tugboats. The following day, and still limping, the Justitia was found by a 2nd U-boat, which fired 2 additional torpedoes into her. This finally finished her off, and she rolled over and sank with the loss of 16 crew. A few photographs were taken as she went down. The U-124, her 2nd attacker, was sunk by British destroyers before it could get away. The Vedic. The Vedic was an easily forgotten White Star Liner. Built during the war as a troop ship and then serving as a Canadian immigrant ship for the White Star Line until the 1930s, She was one of the first ships that the newly formed Cunard White Star scrapped in 1934. The Bardic. Harland and Wolff built several ships that were called War Standard, specifically called G-type. These were meant specifically for use in the war, but they were finished after the war ended. White Star Line bought 3 of them for cheap to bolster their cargo fleet. She served the Atlantic route until mid-1919 when operations were handed over to the Atlantic Transport Line, and then returned to the White Star Line in 1920 for the Australian route. In 1924 she grounded in almost the exact same spot the Subic grounded in 1907. She was sold in 1925 and renamed 4 more times. In 1941, during the Second World War, she was sunk by the German cruiser Scharnhorst. The Gallic II. The Gallic was the second of the G-type cargo ships bought by the White Star Line. She served both the Atlantic and Australian routes and was sold to the Clan Line during the Cunard White Star merger. She survived the Second World War without incident and was scrapped in 1956. The Mobile. Originally called the Cleveland, she was a Hamburg America liner, but handed over to the Allies as war reparations at the end of the First World War. As if the name Cleveland wasn't American enough, she was renamed the USS Mobile in 1919, and then handed over to the United States lines and named back to the Cleveland again. In the 1920s, she was chartered twice by the White Star Line. She was scrapped in Germany in 1933. The Arabic III. She was built in 1908 in Germany under the name SS Britain. In the beginning of the war she laid mines, but was seized by the Norwegians for the duration of the war. In 1919 she was handed to the P&O and bought by the White Star Line in 1920. She was chartered a few times by the Red Star Line and was broken up in the 1930s. The Homeric. Originally built in Germany as the Columbus, she was handed over to the British as war reparations. As the RMS Olympic lost all of her suitable running mates during the war, or just before in the case of the Titanic, the Homeric was assigned to the White Star Line to work with the Olympic. She wasn't even completed yet at the time of her handover, so she was finished in Germany under the supervision of Harland and Wolff agents. Work was slow since Germans had no motivation to finish a liner only to hand it over to their former enemy. She was slower than the Olympic, so had a hard time keeping schedule. She was reassigned for recreational cruises in the 1920s. After an unsuccessful attempt by her original German owners to buy her, she was scrapped in 1936. The Haverford. The Haverford was built in 1901 for the American line and named after the Philadelphia suburb of Haverford. She served the American line for a while, and then was used by the Dominion Line and Red Star Line. In the 1920s, she was bought by the White Star Line and served as one of the only ships not to end with the IC suffix. She also served White Star Line's less popular Philadelphia routes. Due to structural and electrical problems, she was scrapped in 1925. The Poland. The Poland was built for the Atlantic Transport Line under the name Manitou and purchased by the Red Star Line in 1921 and then transferred to the White Star Line in 1922. She was scrapped in 1925. The Majestic II. The Majestic was built in Germany in 1914 under the name Bismarck. No, not the legendary Nazi warship Bismarck. She was the third of the Imperator class and the largest ship in the world until the completion of the SS Normandy. Her completion was delayed through the First World War and handed over to Britain on her completion in 1922. She was assigned to the White Star Line where she acted as the company's flagship. She ran alongside the Homeric and Olympic on the Atlantic route where she gained fame and notoriety as one of the most popular and luxurious liners afloat. She was successful until the Great Depression, when she was transferred to running cruises between New York and Halifax. She was united with her sister, now named the Beringia under Cunard, after the Cunard White Star merger. She was retired in 1936 and sold for scrap. But hold on, we're not done. She was saved by the British government and used as a training vessel for another 2 or 3 years when she suffered a fire and sank. The wreck was raised and scrapped in 1943. The Majestic is the largest ship ever operated by the White Star Line. The Pittsburgh. The Pittsburgh was built from 1913 to 1920 for the American line, but was acquired by the White Star Line and operated for 3 years when it was handed over to the Red Star Line and renamed the Penland. She served as a troop ship in the Second World War and was sunk by bombers in 1941. The Doric II. The Doric began service in 1923 and ran the Canadian route in the Atlantic until 1932, when she began working as a cruise liner. In 1935, she sustained a collision and was brought back for repairs, but upon arrival was deemed a total loss and scrapped. The Delphic II. The Delphic was the third of the Type G cargo ships bought by the White Star Line, though they bought her from the original buyers, the Atlantic Transport Line. The White Star Line bought her to replace one of their previous Type Gs, the Bartic, after it was damaged in 1924. Alongside White Star's other Type G, she was sold to the Clan Line in the 1930s and scrapped in 1948. The RMS Regina, built by Harland and Wolff in 1917, was intended to be a commercial liner but was launched early and put into war service, sporting only one funnel. It appears that she was named after the Canadian city Regina, as she was later on the Canadian routes, so while there's no record of her pronunciation, we're going to assume she's pronounced the same as the Canadian city. At the war's end, Regina received her second funnel and was completed for commercial service under the Dominion Line. She transferred to the White Star Line in 1925, where she served for 4 years before transferring to the Red Star Line, where she was renamed the Westerland. She served for the duration of the Second World War under the Red Star Line and subsequently the Holland America Line, before finally being decommissioned and returned to the Cunard White Star Line. A number of efforts were made to refit or repurpose the old ship, but to no avail, and by 1947 she was sold for scrap. The Albertic. The Albertic was originally launched as the München by the Norddeutscher Lloyd Line in 1920, and was immediately handed over to the British government as war reparations, sold to the Royal Mail Steam Packet Company, and renamed the Ohio. She received her final title, the Albertic, when she was transferred to the White Star Line in 1927 to serve on the transatlantic service. In 1934, Albertic was scrapped in Osaka, Japan. The Calgaric. The Calgaric was built in 1918 by Harland and Wolff for the Pacific Steam Navigation Company, under the name Orca. She was bought by the White Star Line in 1927 and renamed the Calgaric for use on the Canadian route alongside the Albertic. She served for cruises in the 1930s and was scrapped in 1935 after the merger with the Cunard Line. The Laurentic II. The Laurentic is an oddball. She seems to have been ordered early, with construction paused for over 5 years, and sold to the White Star Line at a very specific low budget, almost a discount, which is the only time in the entire White Star Harland and Wolff partnership this has happened. She also was outdated right from the start, still using coal after most modern ships had moved on to oil. Her service jumped between the Mediterranean and the Atlantic and sailed White Star's Halifax route. She continued service after White Star's merger with Cunard and was part of the 1937 Spithead Coronation Naval Review. In 1940, she responded to the distress call of a ship that was attacked by torpedoes when she herself was targeted. She dodged the first torpedoes and then got into a skirmish with the U-boat attacker, ultimately losing and sinking with 49 deaths. The Britannic III. The Britannic was meant as a replacement for the soon-to-be-retired Big Four. She was meant to be comparable in size but slower and more luxurious, built in a very Art Deco style. She was completed in 1929. She shined during the Great Depression thanks to her low operating costs. After the Cunard White Star merger, Britannic and her younger sister the Georgic, along with the Laurentic II, were the only White Star liners not sold or scrapped. She served in the Second World War and came out unscathed, and continued service even after Cunard bought out White Star and returned to the Cunard name in 1950. In 1955, after the retirement of the Georgic, she became the last functioning White Star liner and was scrapped in 1961, replaced by Cunard's Sylvania. The Georgic II. The Georgic was the last ship built for the White Star Line prior to their Cunard merger. To accompany the Britannic, White Star Line planned to build the first superliner, the 1,000-foot Oceanic III. However, due to the economy, this idea was cancelled, and the already started Oceanic III was converted to a more economical ship and named the Georgic. Launched in 1931, she was very Art Deco, just as her older sister, the Britannic. She was financially successful and survived through the Cunard merger, serving in the Second World War. Shortly after the battleship Bismarck was sunk, the Georgic was bombed and burned and began sinking. In a rush to beach the burning ship, she collided with another ship and twisted her stern. At one point during all this, she also suffered a massive explosion. She was raised and sent back to Harland and Wolff to be rebuilt as a troop ship. After the war, she was rebuilt again and operated by the Cunard Line as an emigrant ship. She served as a troop ship during the Korean War and retired in 1955, being scrapped in 1956. We've come a long way since the small liners of the Oceanic Class in the 1870s. The Olympic class alone was consuming the weight of an Oceanic Class liner in coal in a single one-way voyage. Now I know exactly what's on your mind. You're wondering just how many of these ships sank. White Star Line gets a bad reputation for having lost so many ships, but this isn't truly a fair judgment on the company. Out of 89 ships, 34 of them were lost in sinkings. Well, that's more than 1/3. However, that's not a very honest answer. Of those 34, 9 of them were lost by the White Star Line during wartime. An additional 12 were lost during wartime by other companies. Losing a ship during wartime, we can't really fault them for. Of the remaining 13 shipwrecks that were lost during peacetime, 8 of them were under the command of other companies after they had purchased these ships from the White Star Line. In all honesty, out of the 89 ships, White Star Line only lost 5 due to peacetime disasters. In chronological order, the Atlantic, the Naronic, the Republic II, the Titanic, and the Celtic II. 5 out of 89 ships is not a bad figure. It's honestly quite impressive for such an innovative shipping company. Nonetheless, the ships that they did lose have gone down in history as some of the most iconic disasters. But it's important to remember, for every disastrous liner that the White Star Line had, there were successful and legendary liners to counter it. For the Titanic, we had the Olympic. For the Atlantic, we had the Oceanic. For the Naronic, we also had the Jubilee Class. For the Republic, we had her sisters. And for the Celtic, we had the rest of the Big Four. 54 of their ships made it to scrapping. Of these 89 ships to have sailed with the White Star Line during her primary 64 years, the only remaining vessel is the SS Nomadic, now a museum ship in Belfast. She's well worth the visit. Another ship today that could technically be argued to be a surviving White Star Liner is the Queen Mary in Long Beach, California. She was built in the 1930s under the Cunard White Star flag, though Queen Mary is more famously known as a Cunarder. What is your favorite of these liners? Are there any you've never heard of before? Let us know in the comments below.